Hey everyone! Welcome back for another by request tutorial. As many of you may have seen, a couple years back I did a tutorial on how to paint clouds. Within that tutorial, I mentioned how those clouds I was painting were good for a standard landscape background with other focal points and things in the foreground. I mentioned also how there are other clouds you can paint, bigger, fluffier, bolder clouds that are better for being the main focal point. Those are cumulus clouds. Big, white, puffy, and fluffy, and that's what I'll be demonstrating today. I have pre-mixed my colors here and have them ready to go. The difference here in this tutorial from the last is that I have taken a bit of the sky blue color I mixed of equal portions ultramarine blue and cerulean blue into each of these to create a harmony and uniformity from the cast effect of the sky. It will help the clouds to sit back a bit. I have selected a soft bristled brush. This is a Charvin No. 6 Red Sable Bright, great for mixing and blending without harsh lines. I will be using a Vienna 10-0 spotter brush for the highlight areas that need some sharper detail. I will also come in towards the end of the process with two Mimik Hog bright brushes in 1 and 2 to help scrub in and out some areas. Additionally, the blending brush from Bob Ross is your best friend when painting clouds. Onward to the paint! For the highlight color, I have titanium white mixed with a very tiny amount of my sky blue. This will be for the whitest parts of the clouds, and though it contains blue, doesn't read as anything but white. I have a subtle warm tone comprised of portrait pink, titanium white, and very tiny amounts of ivory black and my sky blue. The purpose of adding the black was to reduce the chroma a bit on that pink color. Next, my mid-tone is made from titanium white, ivory black, and my sky blue. I have also mixed shadow colors of the same blend, but with larger amounts of ivory black. Up in the corner, I have a mixture of sap green and green shade, which I will be using for a distant tree line on the horizon. What I am left with is a highlight, a mid-tone, and a shadow, with an extreme highlight and also something to warm up the clouds in a subtle way. What I have already painted in here is completely dry. Very simply, I laid in a blue sky, gradiating down from dark to light, and laid in some simple grass of varying tones. You will also notice that I did not divide my canvas in half, as this is not visually interesting to the viewer. I left more space for the sky and less for the grass. So I'm just going to start out very roughly here, getting a layout of clouds going. With clouds, I try for an imbalanced balance, so to speak. Clouds are not wandering through the sky trying to balance each other visually, so making them too geometrically balanced is a bad idea. But if we make them too imbalanced, we're going to upset the viewer subconsciously, so we have to strike a happy medium. Lay them out, and when you get a feeling of calmness or rightness inside of you, that's your layout. If you're fighting with your canvas already at this point, your layout is not the best it can be, so keep at it until you feel good. We also need to suggest distance here, so I'm making the clouds nearest the viewer larger, and as they go back towards the horizon they get smaller and a bit closer together. If we progress down the grass, as we traveled, the clouds would seemingly have more space between them. Sometimes you need to put yourself in the scene you're painting to really get a feel for what you need to paint. We as artists need to be mindful of both what the viewer sees on the flat plane, but also where his subconscious might travel within your painting while they look at it. I am now going to start giving the clouds more dimension by adding in one of my shadow colors. I use this to give contrast to the bright white highlight effects that make cumulus clouds so wonderful. If they were all white and fluffy without shadow, they wouldn't stand out as being so luscious and awe-inspiring. Here I am mixing a darker value for my shadows to lay in the undersides of the clouds. While we are painting on a flat plane, clouds have full dimension with all sides, so even though we can't paint in 3D, we have to keep them in mind as we paint. That darker gray is going in to paint the underside of the cloud, what you would see if you were standing directly under one and looking straight up at it. Our light source is hitting the top of these clouds, so only the top areas will get the bright white highlights. Every so often I will come in with the Bob Ross blending brush to fuse the tones together. We don't want them to look very separate at this point, but more like they gradually flow into each other. Remember, clouds are water and allow the light to reflect and permeate through them, so the transitions from dark to light will be gradual without harsh geometric lines. You can also make a determination about which way the clouds are moving with this blending brush. It gives a nice feeling of motion. As I work, you will see these clouds are very much more extreme than the last clouds. The shadows are extreme and the highlights are extreme, and this contrast makes them a bold choice for your canvas. So, as I said in the first tutorial, these clouds are best for expansive landscapes, like a seascape or something like this, where not too much is happening in the foreground. They're focal points in themselves. If you start adding a ton of stuff in the foreground, it will all read a bit too busy and overpowering. Less is more. It's time to come in with that highlight color and work the uppermost regions of the clouds in, the area that is closest to the sun. At this point, I am going to continue to intensify the shadows and highlights, pushing that contrast up to give the feeling of dense fluffiness and dimension. The process of painting remains the same as you've seen so far, but at this point I'm really letting my artistic eye and my intuition go to work. While I do have a few photo references to look at, clouds are really best to let happen on their own, almost as an extension of the artist. Being super strict with getting your clouds to look exactly like a photo of the clouds isn't advisable because they will end up looking too flat and motionless more often than not. Use your references, but allow yourself some play and the clouds you paint will look much better for it. Clouds are fun and expressive and no two are the same, so why not have a good time painting them? Sometimes I like to take my small brush and sort of roll it on its side to create the edge of the cloud to keep things from getting too scalloped and uniform. You can go in and adjust where you need to afterwards, but I like that it gives a little more of an organic look. I'm going to continue on here, just refining and working until I'm getting something that I feel is right. With my blending brush here, instead of brushing the paint in an outwards direction, I'm very softly using it in a small circular motion so as not to blend out the neighboring clouds. Don't lose sight of the perspective of your clouds. Again, I know you're working on a flat plane, but be sure you know that some clouds sit in front of others. As you can see with what I'm doing now, I'm using the darker value to make the cloud placement a bit clearer. The portrait pink color I have added very sparingly to this, just to warm up a few areas. I'm not sure it has shown up much on camera, but it's there to be used sparingly for the time of day I'm painting. If you're painting a scene that's closer to either dusk or sunrise, you'll want to use a bit more of it than I have here. Alright, we're almost to the end of this process, and I find that I really would prefer some more sky happening in between these clouds. So I'm going in with my Mimik Hog No. 1 bright brush and my leftover sky color, and I'm just scrubbing in that color around the clouds as need be. Your clouds are white, your paint is blue, you're using the same palette, so you can easily sort of erase the areas of clouds that you're not abundantly thrilled with. You may have noticed that I'm not making these clouds completely photorealistic. I'm taking it about 90% to photorealism, and there's a definite reason for this. If you think back to other talented painters you've seen who paint big, perfect, photo-like fluffy clouds on their canvases, you may too have noted that, though beautiful, they feel stagnant. They're just sitting there solidly on the canvas, not moving or transforming with the wind. I will pause here and tell you that you absolutely can continue on to make it completely photorealistic as such. That's totally your call as an artist and what your aesthetic prefers. But I am going to stop here because I want to leave a very slight uncertainty. Within this uncertainty is where painting becomes more creative than simply capturing a beautiful landscape with a camera. As painters, we have this slight leeway a photographer does not have. Not as much leeway as an animator has, but some, and this bit we can have some fun with. Leaving this uncertainty is what I call my 10% rule, which is leaving about 10% of the co-creative experience to your viewer. I have taken them most of the way, and now I'm going to leave them 10% to do with as they please. They can transform the rest of these clouds into their own ideal and decide which way the wind is blowing. None of this happens consciously, of course, but it happens constantly. When you're out on a walk and you look up to the sky and see clouds like these, the view is too expansive for your eyes to transfer every bit of detail there is to your conscious brain. So we subconsciously fill in what we cannot take in with our storage of prior information. This prior information is typically going to be the ideal version of that object, which is good for both you as the artist and them as the viewer. Not only will they make that 10% their ideal, but they'll feel like they shared in the creative process with you, which they most certainly have. Creating is also retained in the mind better than being given static information you can't take part in, so your art will be more apt to be remembered. It's a win-win situation for everyone. I'll go into my 10% rule more in future videos, as I feel there are some exceptions, but for landscapes especially, it's a constant. If you've tried to paint cumulus clouds before, you might have realized that they just sort of sit there really obviously on the canvas, looking like they're almost separate from the rest of the action. This is where the blending brush comes to the rescue. What I'm doing here is putting in that pure titanium white for the extreme highlight, and I'm ever so slightly blending them out. Very, very softly, barely touching the paint with the brush. This blends it out just enough so that it sits back on the canvas where it belongs without losing that harder edge of fluff. I'm just going to very quickly smush in a tree line in the distance here. Do a better job at this than I am right now. I'm just blocking them in really fast so you can see the illusion of distance happening here. Sort of as above, so below, if you will. And that's it. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you learned something new and feel excited to try to do this on your own canvases. I would love to see your work, so if you're on Instagram, you can upload your work and use the hashtag #PaintWithDevyn, and Devyn is with a Y, so I can see your efforts and others can learn from your work as well, sort of like an online class atmosphere. As always, if you have any requests you'd like to see in tutorials, you can leave them below or contact me on Instagram at Devyn Samara. I'll add your request to the list. If you have any questions on this tutorial, please be sure to leave them below as well. Have an awesome day, everyone. Happy painting!